Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Down the Donut Hole podcast. And today, nervous dingus. I think that's what you told me.
Well, we will talk a little bit about nervous news, but
okay.
Yesterday, our Easter special, where we talked about some of the lore associated with all the icons that we enjoy over the Easter tide, we talked about some pre-Christian ideas, and we touched upon the more Christian Catholic observations of Easter. And we said that today we would talk about Dyngus Day, and we are going to do that right now. Dyngus Day
is... Dyngus first and no nervous today?
No, we'll wait on the nervous news. We'll pick up where we left off.
See, I don't
think
really
that's
like
a good
it,
way.
But, maybe I'm addicted to it.
We can't escape it completely, but here's the thing.
Okay.
Dyngus Day is a Christian holiday, Eastern European in origin. And in the old times, the young men would lightly tap the young ladies with a pussy willow switch that was, they grow this time of year, a harbinger of spring. And so it was just a light, fun, it was just joyful, playful observation of spring and all the things that are coming. We know that the land will warm up, that we'll be able to plant things, all of the fertility that's associated with spring, and the relief from having endured a long winter. That's all part of it. Over the years, it came to include a Christian aspect. And so it is a celebration of baptism, of the washing away of original sin, and the acceptance into the greater community of Catholics specifically and Christians in general. And there's playful sprinkling of water on each other during that time, sort of a less formal acknowledgement of baptism and the cleansing aspects of it. And I think that that's a delightful way because the people participate in that. It isn't so much a clergy thing as a folksy way of saying, I am happy. I am part of something larger than myself, which is a big thing for people. And I am ready to remake my life, to take control of my life and spend it in community with others. So I was going to expound on that more than this today. But this morning we woke up and we learned that Pope Francis has died.
Yeah.
And that makes me feel very sad because when we think of spiritual leadership in these times, we think about Pope Francis. And I do know without any doubt and without any sectarian allegiance that he was a man who cared deeply about others. He tried to remake the papacy in a way that was less formal. He removed some of the pomp of it. I know in the very beginning, in his very first days as Pope, he made the announcement that he didn't want to wear fancy papal garb. I believe there was a thing with red shoes. That
just going around in red Converse or Snickers of some other ilk.
He said, no, I'm not going to do that. I think that the papacy should be more one of the regular people. And I know that recently there has been some difficulty between Pope Francis, J.D. Vance specifically, and the concepts of our government's removal of so many immigrants. I know Pope Francis was very tender toward immigrants, for people who had been unhomed, for people who were refugees, and that was a special part of his ministry to, to make sure that they were not suffering needlessly and that there was not other anxieties added to their plight because of politics. And so lately our government, I know President Trump believes, and I would concur, that a large part of his popularity was because he declared that he was going to close the U.S. borders to make them less porous, to make the U.S. less welcoming of immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers. and that he would expel the people that are already here. And we've seen him holding to those promises in a very, very dramatic fashion. And I know that J.D. Vance has spoken to the Secretary of State of the Vatican in the last little bit, and it was described in the press as an exchange of opinions. Now, J.D. Vance is a convert to Catholicism. He's only been a member of the Catholic faith for about 6 years. And while we can have spiritual discussions about how we arrive at higher levels of enlightenment, when it comes to how Christians treat others, I think we'll defer. We'll defer to the church, not to a political leader. And I think it's important to stay in our lane.
That's the ideal, anyway. That's the ideal.
Well, it just seemed a little
exceptionalist,
a little elitist, a little teenage, if you want my opinion. You know how you'll have a teenager who thinks they know better than authority figures, parents, teachers, people who have worked in a certain area. And while we do give them some grace because of idealism, because of naivete, because of inexperience, coming from a state official to challenge what the tenets of a religion that they've newly joined seems a little beyond the pale, frankly. I take exception to.
Well, I feel a little differently. I think you should always question authority, and not to be just contrary, but that's part of everybody's individual spiritual quest, and it needs to be personal. And you can, and then in the process, there will be some questioning of the old rules and dogma and stuff.
Well, we're not talking about dogma here. We're talking about how we treat other human beings. How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, that should be the test. It should be the test because we're all humans, we're all earthlings, and there's still division both in the political scene and on the organized religion scene as well.
Yeah. I don't know. It didn't set well with me. Apparently, he and his family were in Italy to talk about the tariffs and ways that Italy might mitigate some of the expense of that for their people, and where we all stand on this issue, and is there room for deals, et cetera, et cetera. And during that time, he did have that conversation with the Secretary of State, and then the other day he got to speak with the Pope himself. Now, Pope Francis has come out very strictly defensive of the immigrants' situation, and he cautions against cruelty toward immigrants, toward unfeeling hostility toward people who are not in a position really to defend themselves. So he's been very direct. He has put out messages that are unmistakable in their character, and I do believe that it has given pause to some of the people who were very happy to have President Trump elected, largely because of his stance on the abortion issue, which is something that's dear to the hearts of Catholics. And I think that maybe it's come as a bit of a surprise to our administration that the Pope would be so adamant and direct in his, his clarification of where the church, where Christians stand on that issue. And I think it's a good reminder for the whole world. I also think that it is no small thing that a pope in certainly his advanced years and in fragile health, as Pope Francis has been for a long time, that he would stand up and take so direct a stance. Other people think that he should have been far more direct than he was, but we have to remember this is a very old man in very poor health with a lot on his shoulders.
In that vein, and I don't mean to be trite, but is anybody wondering if JD's visit stressed him out too much?
Oh, I'm sure there are people who think that. I don't think that the conversation with the Pope directly, we don't know what that was specifically. We know that the conversation between the Secretary of State of the Vatican, who works with the Pope, that he and JD, they put it this way, that there was an exchange of opinions. And again,
That usually
sounds
means argument. It's a nice way of saying argument.
Yes, it sounds like an argument. And I'm thinking, it's best when you approach something like that. I mean, there's 1.3 billion Catholics in this world, and that church is a very old church, and not all of its history has been delightful. There have been mistakes made, as always. With any organization, there's mistakes made. But I will say, for it to have endured as long as it has, it's best to come with your hat in your hand and your opinions to yourself for a long while until you have had a chance to not impose or try to impose your opinions on a long-standing agency such as the Catholic Church, as to ask questions with a sense of humility, especially if you're new to the tenets of the Church. You ask questions, you listen, you seek guidance, you request clarification for things that are troubling you. You come as a supplicant, not as a representative of a political ideology that you wish would be able to remake the official stance of a long-standing organization. And I'm saying this because I think it's an important thing. We are not in good standing in the rest of the world at this time. And part of it is because of flat-out hubris. And we need to rein it in. We need to behave like respectful people, and we need to learn to get quiet and listen. That's not too much to ask. We ask that of each other. And when you have someone who is in a position of understanding on a particular issue, it is best that you don't rush in from the outside and begin, tearing things up or blowing your own horn. It's time to listen. It's time to be respectful. It's time to grow up. We can't keep this up. It has caused a great deal of harm for us as a country. And it's caused a great deal of harm with our canceling of aid that agencies have counted on. There's ways to do that. There's ways to do all of that. But quickly is not the answer, for certain. So there's hope. There's always hope. And once we get over our initial rush to prove that we're going to drain the swamp or make a swift change and everything is going to be perfect going forward, once we understand that it's never going to be perfect going forward, but it can be more acceptable than it is right now to most people. And so with the death of Pope Francis, the world will get quiet. We have the vacant see, as they call it, which means that the Pope is gone. It's an empty role. And now the process of selecting a new Pope will begin. So,
what does C actually mean? I never
Holy
understood
See.
that.
I mean, I think it's like the
How do you spell
God's
that? It's not
SEE.
okay.
Like I believe that it means the human eyes that God, seeing the world through the human eyes of a designated spiritual leader on earth. That's my understanding of it, and I could be far wrong. I don't know,
Sounds
but that's what
logical.
I've always kind of had.
Logical, but I think he uses all of our eyes, to be honest. But
He absolutely does.
I think that's it's a good theory about the use of that word anyway.
He does indeed look, sees the world through everyone's eyes, and that would be from the most important person in the world to the least important, weakest person on earth. And when we're talking about Christianity, the whole concept of love thy enemies and love thy neighbor as thyself, and that love is the most important commandment, if we reiterate that, if we practice that in our own lives, what can I do to help? I see this thing that is wrong, that's spinning out of control. We need to stop the damage. We need to get damage control quickly, and we need to make reparations and get this set right, because we are one humanity.
Yes.
And if you are a Christian, if you are a follower of Jesus Christ and a triune God, then you understand what you are called to do. And it does mean making sacrifices. And it may mean giving up a little bit of your goods, your power, so that other people can be okay. And that is the loving way to proceed, and we need to get to that.
Absolutely.
This process now of selecting a new pope is centuries old. And so the pope will be removed from his apartments. His apartments will be sealed. He will be transported to the Basilica of St. Peter's. He will lie in state for a few days. Usually burial takes place within 6 days from the day of his death. And during this time, all the cardinals in the world will be called to conclave. And within the next roughly 3 weeks, the cardinals will arrive in Rome, and all cardinals can come, but only cardinals under the age of 80 can vote for the new pope.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, I think that's fair. They can come, they can be part of the discussions ahead of time, and but they will not cast their vote. And so the vote, they will
Why
have...
is it okay for the Pope to be more than 80 then?
I don't think they can vote for someone over 80. I know that there's a list of like 9 candidates right now that we know about. But truth be told, any baptized Catholic male could become pope. That's surprising.
So it leaves the women out.
Of course. I believe, though, I truly believe that in the near term, we're going to see that change.
Yeah, I think they've been saying that for a while now.
No, I think it will. When you look at for how long this has been going on, it's, those kinds of things are very slow to change. But I believe it will.
Well, when
because
people
there's a younger
realize,
sensibility.
That's part of everybody being the same, isn't it? I mean, it's an equality
In the
thing.
eyes of God, yes.
Exactly. So
I
there's
think
really no
I think we
excuse for
can't say
excluding
that
women.
everybody is equal in our lives. I think in the eyes of God we are, but in all practicality, when we look at the state of the world and what we understand, there's not equality. Seldom equality. I mean, you can have political equality on the books, but in actual practice, I'm not so sure. You know?
What is there an actual doctrine of what the reason is that a woman can't hold high post in the church?
I think it was always that they felt that women were distracted. And there's always been this whole concept of Eve and the original sin has gone on, forever. And because of that archaic understanding, it makes it seem as if anyone who happens to be born female is sinful inherently or leads others to sin. And I think there's ways of looking at that call others to step up. I mean, if you're saying that just because someone is female, that they're more apt to lead someone on to sin, especially sexual sins, does that not, if you look at it a little bit differently, suggest that males are weak-minded,
Yeah.
easily
They kind of are in some ways,
seduced,
yeah.
that they're not able to discern for themselves what's right and what's wrong and then behave accordingly. So if you're looking for a scapegoat, and I mean that in terms of politics too,
Yeah.
if you're always blaming somebody else, and when things aren't going well, you're looking for something convenient to shift responsibility toward, it suggests an inherent weakness in the very people that are strutting around pretending that they're powerful.
Yeah, that's the problem.
So we need maybe to
You
take this all
basically
apart.
vilify 50% of humanity
Yes.
through history.
So you don't have an opportunity.
That's another subject.
Yes, it is. Anyway, the conclave is a very secret affair. They're sworn to secrecy. They are not to talk to the outside world about what happens in that meeting. They discuss candidates, pros and cons. The other people who are not cardinals, any secretaries, anyone like that, they also have to swear to secrecy with their hand on the Gospels. And there is a threat of excommunication from the church should anyone knowingly violate that, and especially if they take money to violate that code of secrecy. And one of the reasons why they protect this whole process is because, in a way, exactly what we saw recently with our government representatives meeting with members of the Vatican is that there's a certain degree of pressure to give a nod to or assent to or condone, or what's a better word? To acknowledge maybe some level of validity with political movements, be they pro or be they con, representatives of government that interface with a spiritual organization would be looking to make it seem like they're on the right track with things. And so they want to keep this under wraps. They don't want outside influence on the process. And so it's kept very, very hush-hush. In the end, they vote. And they can have a very early vote with the people present. And they need a 2/3 majority in that conclave to have successfully elected a new pope. So 2/3, there have been attempts to reform that into a simple majority, but that was rejected because they felt no, because then there may be some pressure to just wait it out, until you can get to the place where all you need is a couple of votes to win. And so they're saying, no, we need a 2/3 concurrence on the suitability of the candidate to replace the deceased pope. And so I think I like that idea. I think that shows an overwhelming agreement among cardinals because they're coming from all over the world. And so they know what the situation out there is among the faithful. And 2/3 consensus sounds good to me.
How long does it usually take?
It can take a while. It could take
Is
a
there
while.
like a vice pope or something? Is somebody
No.
that's
Well,
acting in that position?
The Chamberlain, who happens currently is an Irish-born American. His last name is Farrell. I forget what his first name is. But they take over administrative duties, financial duties that the Pope usually sees to, because he's got to sign off on everything. And so the Chamberlain steps into those sort of clerical duties for the papacy. And, so things don't get snarled up as this process goes. But there is I don't know, how widely known it is. I think there was a movie last year that talked about how they vote in this conclave. And I think it's quite fascinating because each of the cardinals is given a slip of paper. And across the top, it essentially says, the person that I nominate for Pope is, and then there's a blank line. And they write the name of the person that they think should become pope. They fold this paper in half. They walk it up and they set it on a tray. And then it's tipped into a basket or a receptacle of some sort. And then the votes are counted. And as they pull the papers out to count them, they run a needle and thread. They're threaded together on a thread. And then if they have not succeeded in gaining a 2/3 majority for any particular candidate, because this is random names on this now. This isn't just, one or two candidates, yay or nay. They can nominate anyone they want. They can write any name they want on that paper. So they thread them together and then burn them so that it's secret what the names were that are on those ballots. And when they burn them,
They must count them first.
they count. That's what I said.
Oh.
If they don't have
There's just heard threading them through.
if they don't have the 2/3 majority, then they have not elected a new pope. And so when they burn them, they add a cartridge that will make the smoke black that comes out of the stove. That's
Why did I think it was red? I thought it was colored.
no, it's black smoke means they have not reached a consensus on who should be pope. When people on the outside gathered waiting for this see white smoke, they know that they have elected a new pope, that a 2/3 majority was achieved. So
Interesting.
So
I do like the idea of write-in campaigns.
I do too, and I also like this.
You don't have any of this other stuff that they have in politics.
I also like the idea of clipping these ballots in some way. I think in that setting, a secret session, a private thing, I think it's fine to burn them. But I do think write-in ballots, written ballots, I think if they're clipped in some way or embossed in some way, then you know that they were counted. And maybe they have to have two separate runs at being counted, just automatically. And that seems fair to me. And I think there would be a lot less worry about elections. I didn't used to worry about the fairness of elections very much. I always believed that our country had free and fair elections. And I've always believed that, you're going to have, especially if you're voting at the community center and it's, local officials, they always seem like they had it under control. I mean, they had like a little bake sale over to the side always.
Yeah.
And you knew these people, and I never believed that there was such political division that they would be motivated in any way, shape, or form to elect anybody. And I believe that it would be pretty transparent if there was funny business, because
When I first voted, it was the mechanical machines. You collect these switches down. And it's got some rod that flips a counter somewhere.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, you can't hack something like that. That's
no. I'm beginning to think, they act like, oh my goodness, we have to have all of this computer stuff because it facilitates counting. But if you're doing it in small batches, you go down to the high school and everybody's in the gym and you cast your ballot and they count them, they're only counting that area. I personally believe that post offices should be required to have some kind of a counting mechanism, because there's post offices in God's country, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons why we shouldn't be closing up post offices. I think we should make them more cost effective by having them serve more than one purpose. I think certainly in the pandemic, we could have been using post offices because they're never far away or terribly far away from a dwelling place. And people have a sense for who's who. And if it's old Mr. Jones who can barely walk and he comes in with his daughter-in-law or, his son or his brother's family or something, they know. They kind of have a sense for who's who. And I just think let's start using that as a mechanism to kind of keep track of things better. And then we can stop the nonsense. And personally, I absolutely do not believe in redrawing election lines. I think it should be your post office, your postal carriage area is your voting district. Whatever that is, whatever your zip code is, that's where you go to vote.
Yeah, that makes too much sense, though,
And school buses and that, voting election days, they have to be available to give the public rides, especially if you're going to be calling out people and saying, hey, you have to come in and we have to verify you, then you need to provide transportation or shut up.
Yeah, that's fair.
And also the ballot counting. I know vote by mail works great for me because I don't always have easy transportation. And so it's very important if you...
Plus you don't have to stand in lines and that sort of thing.
No, it's much, much better. In places like this, in the heat, I know there have been issues, and they don't even want people to be handing out bottles of water. I mean, like I say, in the early days when I first started voting, they would have a little bake sale set up, and they were selling water out of coolers with ice, just bottled water and stuff. And nobody had a problem with that. It was kind of nice. You went to your polling place and got yourself a cup of free coffee. It was always free. Free coffee or free tea, and they have cookies you could buy. And that was usually the Boy Scouts or, some little local organization would have a bake sale. And I liked it. And it worked.
So they can't have water now? We haven't voted in person in a long time, so I don't really know.
No, I was reading a bunch of different times where certain polling places, they were upset because there were groups outside passing out free bottled water to the people in line. And the reason for all the hoopla about it was they were thought that these agencies or groups that were passing out the water were trying to influence elections.
Just because they had the picture of somebody on the bottle
of water? No,
it
was just bottled water, with just the normal label on it. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the election process of the Pope is very, very ancient. Most of the people who have been elected Pope are cardinals since some crazy year, 1378. I think there's only been a couple of people who were not cardinals. And I know that Pope Francis has put in a request that is granted that he will not be buried at St. Peter's. There's another basilica in the area that he wants to be buried at, that he felt a particular spiritual connection to. And so I think that's going to be granted.
Yeah.
And also I love the idea that he tried to make it seem less grandiose and more human. And I think he'll be remembered for that very, very fondly. So the world waits. We'll wait and see who will become the next spiritual leader. And I do think that in the sense of humility, I think we should all say, okay, let's turn inward a little bit. Let's get quiet. Let's do some more praying. Let's show some more love to our fellow man. And let's fix things so that it isn't so tipped that a small group of people has ridiculous amounts of wealth and others can barely survive.
Yeah. Tolerate and coexist.
Yes. On those lines, apparently, both Meta and Google are in court against the FTC, who is saying that they are highly likely going to have to break both of them up because of antitrust behavior and because of monopolistic behavior. So Google, they want to break them up as a search engine. They say that they've done a lot over the years to minimize or neutralize competition. Certainly Meta, they've been in, multiple times for their infractions. and overstepping. And I know that the European Union isn't having a lot of the violations of privacy. So that'll be something to watch in the next little while. They say up next will be Amazon and Apple, also for the same kinds of things, antitrust violations and, almost predatory behavior as they hang on to monopolies. So the tech bros are, I think, very happily cozying up to President Trump because he's always open to some sort of a deal. And I think they're counting on that as maybe a way that they can sidestep some of the, the fallout from these FTC.
Google especially, because between the search engine and YouTube, I think they represent something like 60% of the internet traffic. So talk about a majority, a monopoly, so to speak, on the internet bandwidth, if nothing else.
Oh, I know it. I use Google.
Yeah.
And, the thing
good.
is, this is really dating us, but do you remember when they broke up the telecoms?
AT&T.
Do you remember how for a while there, I mean, even now, telephones, it's not as easy. It's not as straightforward. I mean, you used to just go pick up your phone, unless it was after like a thunderstorm or something. You pick up your phone, it always worked. You could call anywhere if you knew the telephone numbers and that. It just seemed like afterwards that it was a lot less reliable than it was. And,
Yeah, well, that's the wireless issue. It's great, but it's not going to be as good as a hardwire for reliability. That's true.
No. So, I don't know. When you see these continuous court cases and you just wonder, how many times are they going to have to go and sit through this before somebody just says, okay, this is enough? It's irksome to me. And it's also irksome to me when you see the line of billionaires, and with Mr. Musk included. And so it's worrisome. I also saw in the Nervous News that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, he's still using Signal.
Oh, he hasn't learned his lesson.
No, and this time it was some operation against the Houthis, and this time his wife was looped in, his brother was looped in, and somebody else. Maybe, I don't know who. Anyway, quit using Signal. What don't you get? You're in the Department of Defense. We have secure channels for this sort of thing. It's not a family picnic.
Well, we'll say more secure channels, we'll put it that way.
Well, they're intended to be secure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the intent. The mechanisms have been at least put in place to, on some level, guarantee some level of discretion. But why do we need Secretary of Defense Hegseth's wife and brother in on this?
Yeah.
No, I mean, really. That almost is like thumbing your nose. I mean, the fallout from the first time, I mean, the reason the world knows it is because it was a responsible journalist who broke the story. And that was after letting them know. So now they're running all of these big searches to see who's guilty of leaking information from inside the DOD. A guy, the reason we know about this new Signal usage offense is because one of the people who were an aide to Secretary Hegseth apparently resigned because there had been all of this big furor over trying to find out who the leaker was, who was disseminating this information to the press.
Probably the guy who resigned.
Could be. Could be.
Or somebody that was thrown under the bus, as they say.
Well, there's always somebody thrown under the bus.
Yeah.
But this is just, again, the guy is a rookie. You just because you carried a pack on your back and a gun on your hip in the military does not make you fit to lead the entire organization. And apparently the Pentagon is in just an uproar. And there's a lack of continuity, there's a lack of prudence, a lack of discretion. All of this is provable, or we wouldn't be hearing about all of this. I don't want to hear about it. And when I think you've got the nuclear football, I that does not give me a peaceful, easy feeling.
No, I wouldn't think so.
So I think let's not be so zealous about finding how the information got out, and let's just get down to business. Put your head down, do the right thing. Don't go crazy. Step by step, you can identify ways that things can be done better. You don't rip the roof off your house to clean the cobwebs out of the upper corners. So, there's where we're at with that. I think certainly these days, since the whole tariff uproar, there's been quite a drop in public confidence. I know over the past weekend there were tremendous amounts of protests again. And this time it isn't just Democrats that are out on the streets waving signs and hollering. Everybody has bad feeling about it. And a lot of these tariffs are hitting the farmers really hard. I mean, some of them can't buy feed. And the cost of things is just going to go up.
I thought there was a 90-day hold on all of that.
I don't think it's on everything. I don't think it's on everything. I think it's on some industries, but there are other things that the tariffs are holding. And a lot of the countries that we're tariffing are saying, we're not going to deal.
Or is it just that
we just won't buy your we just won't buy your stuff.
Or is it just that artificial thing that happens when there's confusion about whether a tariff or something is in effect or not, and then people say, "Oh, let's just creep the prices up anyway," and they'll blame it on that.
I am sure that there will be people who will take advantage of the uncertainty and the confusion. Like always, we always know that that's going to happen. That's one of the reasons why a steady hand on the tiller is usually wiser in the long run. Be cautious and make change prudently, not just for a big show. A train wreck does get notice, but not in a good way. And this is it's really scaring a lot of people, and a lot of people who took a flyer on this vote, who said, well, he said he's going to drain the swamp. And basically, I think they didn't realize that it was going to be quite this abrupt and seemingly seeing what sticks, you know what I mean? Yeah. Some giant action that hasn't really been studied to the degree that it should. A lot of people are worried about losing their jobs because so many jobs depend on government funding. I feel for those people because if you've made a decision about mortgages, colleges, cars, big purchase items, where you've located, now is not a comfortable time for anyone of either party. And so I think this is a good time for prayer. At the beginning of spring, let's just pray that things kind of settle down, we get under control, move forward a lot more gently, and that we become a little more spiritual, a little more aware of each other, and that we do seek to find balance in our own life, not respond with hatred or anger or acts of vandalism or violence, but that we govern ourselves in such a way that the life for everybody can begin to improve. And with that, we're out of time.
What about Dyngus Day?
I already said Dyngus Day, throwing water on each other.
That was
the idea
that there was more.
There was going to be.
Why did they call it that?
I don't know.
Okay.
Hey, count your blessings. There are many. Find something that you enjoy today and spend a little bit of focus on that, and on your spirit. Look inward because you'll find answers there.